Hello, everybody. My name is Spencer Harrison, and today we are going to talk about an introduction to writing in memoir style for your college essay. Before we begin, a little bit about me. If you don't know, I have over 10 years of teaching and tutoring writing experience at the university level. I have a master's in creative writing, a master's in education. I've reviewed thousands of essays over my career, and most recently, I was awarded a Fulbright scholarship to Kazakhstan and received training on how to write that application. And so, a lot of my method and strategies come from that training and experience. So, today the topic is memoir writing. So, first off, what is memoir writing? We're going to do sort of a limited sense of it today, but it is about recreating what a moment felt like from the inside, especially for today. We're going to talk about focusing on one specific moment, although something like a memoir, a book, obviously is going to cover a bunch of different moments, but it covers one at a time, so one specific moment at a time. And it privileges emotional truth over objective recording. And so it works on multiple different layers. It works on a sensory level, an emotional level, and a psychological level. And so, why is this something we care about for the college essay? The college essay is something that you want to stand out at. And so, by zooming in, very narrowly and focusing on specific details of your own life, a unique experience of your own life, and telling that in a unique way, that is going to help you stand out from everybody else. All right, so we'll start with just the very basics of memoir style writing, right? The first thing is that it's written in first person. So a simple example here, I walked into the kitchen, so using the personal pronouns I, me, things like that. The other, second basic component of memoir writing is going to be that it's in the past tense. And so, a simple example down here, we have I opened the locker and smelled chlorine and mildew. And so ultimately, what that's going to do is going to say that we are writing about something that already happened and we're writing about it from the present moment. And so we have the ability to reflect on it and, delve into why it's important and what it means. So those are just the very basic first two components, first person and told in past tense. All right, so here's sort of the bad version of memoir writing, which is sometimes referred to as security camera writing. And so, just like that name suggests, the bad version is basically writing as if you were just a security camera and just kind of writing everything that comes into view, right? And so the bad version here is the boy entered the cafeteria and walked to a table, just very matter of fact. Not much else to it. A memoir style writing, right, might sound something more like the noise slammed into me as I stepped into the cafeteria. I kept my eyes on the floor so I wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. And so, obviously, just from that little example there, you're getting much into the individual perspective of the person who's in the cafeteria rather than sort of a third person objective outside just accounting. So that is what we're going to go into more of today. Um, so again, here you go. The bad version, the security camera version of this scene that we have on the picture here would just be I walked into the classroom. And so when you do that, if you just had that sentence there at the bottom, the image is what might come up. If you were reading that, obviously everybody has their own idea of what a classroom is going to look like. It's going to have a teacher and students. You're saying someone's going to walk in there, right? It can kind of give them a picture, but you're going to make them do some of the work, and it's also certainly not going to be unique or stand out in any way. So we want to develop this a little further. So besides just the black and white security camera, angle, you're going to want to add the sensory details, right? So things like sight, sound, smell, texture, temperature, movement, things like this. And to give you a little bit of preview, just doing that, just adding sensory detail is going to, make the writing a little bit better. I'll just jump ahead quickly here, right? So this is basically that same image we saw earlier, but with a little bit more sensory detail, especially in this instance, since it's a picture, color. We went from black and white to color. And so, if all you do is go from black and white to color, so to speak, it is definitely going to be an improvement and it's going to make it a better story to read. But we're going to want to go further. And so, you can still kind of be stuck in security camera mode, even if you add sensory detail. If I were to give the example down here like this. I walked into the room wearing my orange sweatshirt and green backpack. There were 14 chairs in the room and 13 students plus one teacher at the front of the room standing in front of a green chalkboard. So obviously that's your, sort of very basic general security camera accounting of one description of what might be going on in the scene. And yes, it's accurate, but it's also not that interesting, especially just specifying numbers and colors, which is basically all that does. So we want to do more than that. And so that comes down to something often referred to as emotional filtering. And so ultimately you want to give that description, but you want to filter it through the emotion of the subject of the story, right? And so just in general, right? Humans don't notice everything equally, for example, when they walk into a room. And so a nervous person is going to, notice different details than a relaxed person. So a nervous person, right, might notice ticking clocks or a storm coming in, right? Whereas a lonely person in that same room is going to pay more attention to and notice silence or empty spaces. A happy person might notice warmth and color. And so, depending on the emotional experience of the person who's telling the story, we're going to get much different details, right? Even though it can be from the same scene. So, we don't want to just give a blanket, security camera version of a story. We also want to pick the details that are going to be consistent with the emotion that the person is feeling. And so that is going to be the first step into memoir style writing. So let's look at an example. So this is just the same picture here, but as you can see, there are a few details are a little different. And so you see the sun streaming in the windows and people waving and smiling. And so it has a little bit of a different energy. And so obviously there's some sort of, mood of happiness, something like that going on here. And so the image just has a little bit of a different character. So if we were to, you know, apply the sort of emotional filtering idea to writing, to memoir style writing, we might get something like this. The sun gloriously shone down, streaming through the windows, bathing my welcoming classmates and teacher in golden light as I walked in, and we smiled and waved at each other. And so here, we could have given the security camera version of this, which we had in the beginning, right? Which is just I walked into the classroom, or the slightly better version with some sensory detail, which, had a orange sweatshirt, a green backpack, green chalkboard, things like that. Um, but here we even get some more details by themselves that are suggesting a kind of, emotional and perspective, right? So we get the emphasis on the sun and not just the sun, but that it's gloriously shining down, right? And then we do get a quick description that we're talking about classmates and a teacher, but we're not just leaving it at that. We're saying they're bathed in golden light, right? And so that gives them a little bit of a character. And then we get a straightforward here. We smiled and waved at each other. So we're getting a description of um, body positions and body actions all working together to kind of give this sense of a positive, happy emotion going on here. And so now if you take away that image, right, and we are left with this description, it gives you a little bit more to go on than otherwise than previously. So to point out just some shortcuts or sort of stand-ins, some common stand-ins that you use for this kind of writing. in memoir style writing. So one sort of shortcut is weather, right? We just saw, right? Good weather generally is associated with positive emotions like the sun shining, we just saw. Bad weather generally is associated with negative emotions. And color, same thing, right? Color can be a pretty quick shortcut into conveying emotions. Different emotions are going to be connected to different kinds of color, but not just color. It is also going to be how you describe those colors. And so, you know, um, a bright yellow is going to give a much different sense than sort of a pale, decaying yellow, right? And so, furthermore, it's not just what details you choose to write about in the description, it's going to be how you write about those details that'll give it an emotional character. And so then the other way to sort of describe emotions, right, without explicitly stating them is going to be going into things like we were just talking about. Is body positions and body motions and things like that, right? So if you describe someone as having slumped shoulders, they're obviously going to be something like sad, kind of like that. If they have biting nails or heart pounding, nervous, they're going to be sweating. And so when you are describing body positions and actions, that also often is a shortcut into some emotion. So let's look at a new example here. So just by the picture here, right? It's again the same classroom, but the colors are a little bit different and you get a little bit different of action. And so, even just the image version, you get a different emotional impact from this. And so then your writing would want to convey the same thing. And so you want to pick up on different details. Um, and write about them in a way that aligns with the emotion we're trying to convey. So for this example, that could look like the gray skies were pouring rain as I walked into the dimly lit classroom with my eyes cast down on the floor, shoulders slumped and feet shuffling. Not a single person even knew I walked in as they looked down at their gray desks wearing gray notes on their gray papers in complete silence. All right, so obviously one of the big features here, right, is gray, gray, gray. And so really hitting that over the head to emphasize that sort of the overwhelming color we're feeling in this, which is true of the picture, right? And then does just give this sense of sort of sadness, right? And also, like I mentioned, right, the first thing it starts with is the weather. So again, that can be kind of a nice shortcut into the emotion we're trying to convey. And then it gives some body positions, right? You have the students' eyes are cast down on the floor, so shoulders slumped, their feet are shuffling, so their body language is very low energy, right? It's cast downward. And then they're noticing that not a single person else in the room noticed them as they look down at their desks and their papers and things like that. So here's just again one example, and you could have picked a lot of different details, right? You could have picked a focus on the green chalkboard, or the green backpacks, or the orange sweatshirt, but those details are, left out of the written description to sort of focus in on details that are going to more convey our emotion that we're trying to give off. And so that is sort of both things working there is that we're going to pick not just the details that support our sort of narrative, but we're also going to describe them in such a way as to make sure that those also are described in a way that conveys the emotion. Okay, so let's look at another example. So to sort of get one step further, another thing you're often going to encounter when, writing styles like this, emotional filtering, that kind of thing, is something called personification, right? And this simply is when you just are giving non-human objects human characteristics, right? That make it seem like they alive or have a human character for a particular purpose. And so this is sort of figurative or literary language, but we use it often, even without thinking about it. But this can really kind of drive home the point that we're, imbuing the surroundings, the environment, the non-human components of an environment with the human character to really drive home the point of the emotion of the person we're talking about. And so ultimately, it's just a more interesting way than just saying, hey, this person was, very sad or this person was very happy. It also just gives a purpose to the details we're using. So, some quick examples of personification, right? Saying something like the alarm clock yelled at me to get out of bed. Obviously, the alarm clock is not doing any yelling, but when you say something like that, you convey that the person is very startled, something like that. The old car coughed and protested when the key turned, right? Not things that cars are literally doing, but it shows its kind of character and its age and movement patterns. Another example might be something like the last slice of chocolate cake is calling my name, right? Of course, cake is not going to be saying anything, calling anybody, but obviously going into the sense of temptation. So, any number of different, examples and ways that you can give a non-human object human characteristics to really tell you something about the person we're trying to talk about. So in this example, right, the most noticeable thing here, right, is the clock that's given sort of a human face, and then obviously has some writing below it and some dialogue saying you're late again. So looking at this image, right, this clearly is not something that is literally or, factually true in the real world. You're never going to see exactly a clock like this or saying these things. But certainly when you get the written description, right, it's going to give you a sense of what's going on. That's already pretty clear here in this image, right? You get someone walking in, sweating, they're clearly in a rush, dust is kicking off from them, and then we have the reaction of the room, big eyes looking at them. And so even just you see with it's the same classroom, but just a few different details are changed. Suddenly it gives you a different emotion here. And so if you had a written description here, it might look something like this. I burst into the room, sweat flying, dust rustling, my bags and books swinging wildly. A room full of big round saucer eyes were all glued to me as the hands on the clock had already passed the point of no return. The deafening sound of the tick-tock screamed at me, "You're late again." So that's definitely a long ways from just that, initial description of I walked into the room. So suddenly, if you are adding certain details and putting them all together, right? I mean, if you were to just say, I walked in sweating, right? That could mean you are nervous or something, but it could also just mean you're hot or you just came from, exercise. And so that's why you do want to give kind of a thick description here of, I was sweating, my bags are swaying and swinging wildly. And then the students have big round saucer eyes, right? Everybody's looking at me. That goes in with the sweating, right? And then the sound of the clock, tick tock of the clock, described as deafening, right? Very extreme. And it's saying you're late again. So all these details are kind of coming together to paint a really particular picture. All right, so those are the basics of, sort of again a brief introduction of memoir style. And so what I'm going to have you do now is have you take a shot at it. So I'm going to show you a picture here, very similar. It's going to be the same classroom, but with certain details changed. And so what I want you to do is do your best to describe the scene using the sort of techniques that we've been talking about, right? So first up is sensory detail, right? And especially in this instance, you can just write what you can see visually in the picture that I'm about to show you. But you don't want to just pick every detail and describe everything. So you want to pick an emotion, and so the emotion actually also is going to be pretty clear from the picture. But so you'll want to pick details that are specific to the emotion that is trying to be conveyed, and then also describe those details in a way that further heightens the emotion. And then so again, one of the good ways to do that is to employ some personification. And so pick a non-human object and give it a human characteristic related to the emotion that we are trying to convey. So these are the three strategies to writing this description. All right, so here is the picture. As you can see, I've tried to make it, pretty easy on you. Some emotion of kind of anger or something like that, right? And so you'll see that the weather has changed, the colors have changed, and then there are also some changes about the classroom and the students and body language, right? And so those are definitely going to be the things you want to key in on to write a little description here. Doesn't even have to be full sentences. It can just be phrases that you start putting together. Again, some of these, hopefully should kind of be pretty easy. But so I'll give you a few minutes, and if you're watching on YouTube here or recording, you can go ahead and just pause here and take as much time as you need to write the description. And then we're going to move on and I'll show you an example. So go ahead and pause it here. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and keep it moving, and I'll just quickly show you an example of what this might have sounded like, right? So, this description is the fire in me raged as I walked through the door. The classroom was bathed in red. Students were cowering behind their desks. Even the red tinted teacher had his hands on his head, hiding in fear at the front of the classroom. The dark, stormy skies crashed lightning down as the windows shrieked and the students' ghosts leapt out onto their desks. So the first thing, right, weather, we have some dark, stormy skies out there, which gives us a sort of sense of brooding, right, negative emotions. And then in the picture, the person is literally on fire, right, which is not uh, exactly what we're trying to convey. But if you describe yourself as on fire, right, that's gonna convey pretty straightforward sense of anger, rage, something like this. And then so again, the colors, all the colors in the room, right, are sort of bathed in red, seeing red associated with anger. And so then we are describing sort of the body positions of some of the students, right? Cowering behind the desk, or the teacher with his hands on his head, right, hiding. And then in this instance, we get some personification here, right? You get the dark, stormy skies crash lightning down. So the sky is actually actively throwing lightning down as opposed to just lightning hitting on its own. And then you get the windows that are shrieking, right? Making a noise here in fear of the lightning. And so putting all these together, and then obviously else also in the picture you have some ghosts here. And so saying that the, students' ghosts leapt out of them would be certainly some nice figurative language here. So the total, you get a kind of nice emotion, mood of anger here from this picture. All right, so I want to give you one other opportunity and then make it a little bit more difficult this time. So I'm going to show you a picture basically where you're going to have to come up with much more details, but it's the same exercise and going over the same sort of techniques, right? You're gonna have to be coming up with some sensory detail, what it looks like, what it sounds like. Again, emotional filtering. So you're this time gonna have to pick an emotion, and then you're gonna have to highlight details that convey that emotion, and then also describe them in such a way that they give off that emotion. And then certainly look for opportunities for personification to also give that character. So once again, it's the same strategies that we've been going over and talking. Again, shortcuts can be weather, color, and body positions, right? Things like that. And so here is the image. So again, this goes back to just the sort of plain security camera, even without really sensory detail here, just a sort of a blank canvas. So go ahead, take a few minutes and try and come up with your own scene here. You can use this really simple image here, right, as a foundation. Mm, or you can just completely come up with your own situation or an actual memory that you have. But the point of the exercise here just being trying to use these strategies and details the way we've been talking about them. So you can go ahead and pause the video here for as long as you need, and then we will keep moving. All right, so that is it. And so the core takeaway here, right, just to sum up everything, is you're not writing what literally happened, right? You're trying to convey, what did this moment feel like from inside my mind and body, psychologically, emotionally. That's what's more important in this instance than some sort of literal, factual, or complete, security camera account of what's going on in the moment. And so when you do something like this, you apply these techniques to a moment in your life. That unique experience that only you had now is also being described in a unique way. And it gives a standing out, lasting impression if you use this in your college essay. So that is it for today. Hopefully you found that helpful. And now what I'm going to go into are some frequently asked questions. Before I do that, I'll just leave this on the screen up here for a moment, which is a QR code to a 50-minute free consultation with me in which you can get personalized feedback on your college essay. And so you don't even need to have an idea yet to make this meeting and meet with me. That's something we can work with you on is brainstorming. Or if you take the writing, some of the writing you did today or similar writing, use the lessons you learned today and come up with a piece, you can also bring that to a consultation and I can take a look and give you some feedback and find some next steps on how to move forward with your college essay. Or you can always just email me at spencerharrison@prestigewritingconsulting.com and ask any questions or share any ideas you have. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some frequently asked questions. All right, so some common questions that I'll get related to this topic, right, is how detailed should I get? How much scene setting is too much? How long should the story part be? So, there's no real hard and fast rules with these. I would say the other point of memoir writing that we don't really get a chance to go into today would be the reflection, right? So sort of the present moment, looking back and reflecting on the moment. And so in your college essay, you definitely want to leave room for that. And so I would say if two-thirds, no more than two-thirds of your essay should be story, and that should leave at least, a third for, again, sort of explicit reflection on, why you thought the moment was important to you. And I should also say, it doesn't have to be the first two-thirds are the story and then the last third is reflection. You can kind of weave it in and break it up, and sort of weave in and out of reflecting. You don't necessarily need to just have it all in separate parts there. But I would say if you're looking for, just a rule of thumb, probably two-thirds or less story. Um, and so, again, do you have to use two-thirds? The thing to say there is absolutely not. You don't want to just throw in details or scene settings, just to throw them in and paint a really full picture, right? That's why I was saying the details that you do pick, you want to make sure that they mean something or are trying to convey something, in this case, in emotion. Um, and you don't really need to put more than you need to, right? It doesn't need to be the whole thing. Your whole essay doesn't need to just be describing one scene in this kind of style. It's just a way to sort of get into it. All right, and so here are a list of questions, right, along the similar theme. What if I don't remember the exact details? Can I make up dialogue? Can I make things up? What if I don't remember exactly what someone said? Do the details have to be literally accurate, right? And so the what I would say here is that the purpose of this essay is to show your writing ability, your voice, and something about who you are. And so, of course, you don't want to just completely make up something, but for the purposes of good storytelling and showing who you are, if you can't remember the exact specific details, right, you can just go ahead and come up with, looking back at it now, what would be the sort of possible plausible things that someone might say. And so, 100% you can add dialogue if you don't, even if you don't remember every last detail and word. But it can make it a better story to do things like that. And so, once again, the point of the presentation today was it shouldn't be literally accurate because again, you're trying to filter it through your own consciousness, which is going to have its own biases and emotional and psychological tint. And so if that's all it is just bare bones, literally accurate, that's the security camera kind of description. And it's just not going to be very interesting or say much about you, right? Whereas if you put the emotional filter on and do things like personification, you're going to come away with things that are not, even realistically possible, let alone literally accurate. And so in those instances, that's not the point. So you're not completely just going to make up a story, make up an achievement or experience, but the description around it doesn't have to be 100% literally correct. All right, so other questions. Can my essay just be one moment? Is one small moment enough? Can I write about something ordinary? Does something big need to happen? So 100%, nothing big needs to happen, and one small ordinary moment can be enough. And so, especially if are doing some of the things that I introduced today, one small moment can really say a lot if the description you're giving it works on multiple levels and says a lot of different things. Um, and then really, what is going to come down to which moment you should pick is also going to be a factor of what kind of reflection can you add along to it, What are you going to say afterwards or during that is going to make it clear why you think it's important, and why you're writing about it. So it doesn't always necessarily matter. Should it be a big thing? Should it be a small thing? Should it be a small moment or, a number of different ones? Ultimately, what you're going to want to land on is something that you can sort of reflect deeply about. And so that's what this next set of questions is going to be related to, right? How do I make the story meaningful? How does the story become insight? How do I connect the story to who I am? How reflective should it be? How do I avoid sounding cheesy? So the short answer and beginning of an answer to those questions, right, is if you are using the techniques I described today and showing how the scene is, emotionally reflecting you, even just the physical setting around you is going to be saying something about who you are, right? And so you're not just going to be describing some external scene, right? It's automatically going to be saying something about who you are. So the question of reflection, right? That's really just a topic in and of itself. And so today mostly was just about the writing style. But so just to help you get started, if let's say you wrote something like this, you wrote a scene and had a thick description and were writing about the emotions and the events, and then now you're finished and you're kind of wondering what to do. These are some questions that you can kind of start to ask, right? Which would be knowing what you know now, if you could go back and say or do something different in that moment, what would that be? What belief of yours has changed after this event? How did it impact the way you lead your life? How do you change how you live your life from now on? What does that story symbolize to you, right? And so another sort of clue about which moment to pick should be something that had an impact on you and something changed in you, right? And hopefully a combination of, what you thought, what you believed, how you feel, and how you live your life, your actions, life trajectory, kind of things like that. And you want to, in order to avoid sounding cheesy or something like this, avoid just summing it up into a simple moral or a lesson, right? Like hard work pays off, things like that. You don't really want to just tie it off into a unique, excuse me, a ready-made bow here by just saying something like that. But you at the very least want to say how it literally impacted you and the specific ways in that you changed after going through this moment. All right. Another set of questions, right? How much personal is too personal, right? Can you write about trauma, mental health, family, conflict, controversial topics? I would say there's nothing that you should, up front certainly not try and write about. I mean, if it's an idea you have and you think it's a good idea, it's definitely worth trying to pursue it and figure it out if it is something you can write about. And so, as long as you think it's a good idea, I think you should go ahead and try it. What you don't want to do is then just write about it in a generic way that sort of, is very common and anyone else can write about it. But so again, if you sort of apply some of the techniques we talked about today, you're already going to be writing about it in a sort of unique way that is filtered through your own perspective and going to say something about you. Um, and so this is similar to a set of the earlier questions, right? But with a few differences. Number one being like, can I swear, or what language should I use? Should I be formal? Should I be informal? Can I be funny? Grammar, things like that. And so I would say the safest thing I would say, there's not a lot of things I would say don't do, but one of the things I feel fairly comfortable saying don't do is swearing. Uh, it's just usually gonna be kind of off-putting, and unless there's a really good reason to do it, and it, for some reason really means a lot to the story and in the way it was said, you maybe could try and do it, but I generally would just say don't do that. Um, Barring that, you can definitely try a lot of different creative things. And certainly for something like, can you break grammar rules? Certainly if it's dialogue, if it's someone saying something, and for sure if it's, just reflective of how they're talking, um, you can go ahead and do that as long as it's in dialogue. That would be certainly be safe. Um, and then can it go up to all the way, sounding like a novel? Yeah, that can definitely be very effective. I would say, as long as it sounds like something you would write. I mean, you don't want to write a novel sounding thing just for the sake of it. But if you're really into novels and literature and things like that, could you really make it something very artistic? I would say yes, as long as that's something that aligns with you. All right, and this is a difficult question, right? Which ultimately is how do I start? How do I start the essay? Should you start with dialogue? Should you start with action, a message, reflection, or should you just start telling a story? Should you, start painting a picture, right? Some of the things we talked about today. Ultimately, there's no easy answer to this, right? And it's going to come down to, the particulars of the essay and the individual. And so I would say just try them all, if you do what we talked about today, you're writing a story, you're writing sort of in a visual mode and in a story mode. Get the thing on paper first, try and basically write the end before you write the beginning. Obviously, you got to start somewhere, but so an easy thing to say is we'll just start writing, the scene about what it looked like, what was going on there. So that's how I would literally say to start writing. That's not necessarily then what I would suggest you always put at the beginning of your essay, but it's a good place to start. And then so I would say try and write it through to the end first before then you start experimenting with different ways to start it. All right, what should I write about? Is my topic too boring? What if nothing important happened to me? Can I write about sports, gaming, music, things? So again, this is uh, questioning about, how to start, what to start, what topic to pick. And so again, I would say it takes some exploration, right? So I wouldn't worry too much about picking the perfect topic up front or picking the perfect memory up front. I would just start with the one that's easiest to write about, which then would be something that happened recently or something that was very impactful and you have a very good memory of it. And so it's not hard to write about. And so that those are really the places I would start. And then again, try and, if you write about it in the ways we were talking about today, it's already going to be kind of interesting and telling something about you and your, emotional perspective and psychological perspective. And so the most important thing is to just start somewhere. And then once you get that on page, then you can start exploring other ideas, right? Other things are going to be connected to one memory is going to be connected to another. And then so suddenly that may spark a different idea that you can try and pursue. Um, but I wouldn't worry about it being too boring or anything, as long as it's important to you and you write about it in something like the way we've been talking about today. All right, similar questions, right? Common topics or cliched topics. So again, I would say definitely in the beginning, don't ahead of time stop yourself from writing about something just because you're worried about maybe it's common or a lot of people write about it. So again, if it's coming to mind, especially early on, it's probably something that's going to be easier for you to write about. So 100% just go and write it. And then if it is a common topic and it seems kind of generic to you after you've written it, and even after you try and, do some of the storytelling techniques we talked about today, only then would I suggest maybe then you start trying to think about other topics or related topics, only if after you've written it, it just kind of sounds like everybody else. So then you either have to rework it or pick a different topic. And so similarly, other topics you should avoid. And so, mm, that everyone avoids, something like that. And so I would say, obviously you are applying to, an academic, which is a professional environment, right? So you do want to be mindful of that. And you do want to be mindful of the kinds of schools that you're applying to and what their sort of values are and what kinds of topics they might be open to. And so in any event, those values should match what yours are. And so if you want to write about something, you should try and find schools that, are going to be open to those kinds of things. If it is something, for example, controversial or something like that. But so again, I certainly wouldn't say from the beginning, you definitely should not write about a certain thing, but you'll want to know who you're writing to, and give it a shot and see how it sounds to you. Okay, so what are admissions officers really looking for? Do colleges care more about writing the story or the story? So there's again no easy answer to this one, right? You can't have one without the other, right? If you have a really good story, but it's really poorly written, right? Then you've already lost something that they're looking for, which is writing ability. If you have really good writing ability, but not a very good or deep story, then you've lost the other part of what they're looking for, which is, saying something unique about you as a person. And so there's not really any sense to sort of really favoring one over the other, especially if you're worried about, the language or how it's going to come across. It's not good just for the sake of that to try and write, for example, really fancy or something like this. None of the techniques that, we talked about today really require you to have like some sort of big fancy vocabulary or, knowledge of grammar or structures or anything like that. And so you definitely don't have to sort of make up that style if it's not yours. But the emphasis on today was just using very simple techniques, right? That then also convey something about your emotions. All right, how important is the essay really? Can the essay make up for grades? Can a strong essay get you in? And so the short answer is that yes, a strong essay can make up for grades, especially if your topic is explaining why maybe one semester or something your grades were a little low. It can definitely make up for that. Obviously, there are limits, it can't get you into a school whose, GPA and test score requirements you don't meet, right? It can't completely change the numbers, but it can make up for numbers if you're almost there or pretty close. Or then obviously it can be a tiebreaker, right? If you have the same test scores and GPA as another student, what's one of the only other ways to break that sort of tie would be something like the essay. Okay, good question. Should the essay match my major? For example, if I'm applying to engineering, should I write about engineering? Should my essay show academic passion? So, the short answer is it's not a bad idea, but it's also not required. I have some schools actually do like this, and they'll state it on their website. There's sort of application philosophy and what they're looking for. Um, I definitely don't think it's a bad idea. Certainly, if that is what is you feel very strong about in your application is the sort of academic trajectory. So I would say it's a good idea if you feel like that's very important to you, or also if that's what the school is asking for. But it's not something you have to do. Okay, structure. So again, structure, how should this be structured? That also is a big topic. One question, should it be a five-paragraph essay? I think it definitely should not be a five-paragraph essay, basically. Because that should already be, you're already going to be writing essays in your classes, right? So that should already kind of be reflected in your GPA as your sort of standard five-paragraph essay, that thing. So if you do it well, I don't think it'll hurt you, but I certainly don't think you need to stick with a five-paragraph essay just for the sake of it. Having something like an introduction and then a body and then a conclusion, which would be similar to, but not necessarily literally a five-paragraph essay, that also can still be a fine structure too. Other structures might include some, like a narrative structure or a montage structure or scene and reflection, which is kind of more what we were talking about today, memoir style. But it certainly doesn't have to be a five-paragraph essay. All right. How many drafts does this take? How long should brainstorming take? When should you start? How do you know it's done? All difficult questions. The short answer is you should start as soon as possible. Summer vacation, going into your senior year is a good time to start and to start early, and that gives you the time to sort of explore and brainstorm and follow different directions because it's probably going to take some time to find the right topic. And how many drafts? I would recommend you write at least 10 drafts, and then so ultimately it could take you even more than 10 drafts, or especially if you change ideas. So that's why I think starting as soon as possible, for example, at the beginning of summer vacation, can be a good idea. All right, can AI help you? Yes, but then don't, rely. It's certainly not necessary, but it can help you. I would say certainly for the brainstorming or maybe the outlining phases, you can use it to sort of come up with some ideas. But ultimately, I would not recommend that any language that you get from AI end up in your final essay. It's usually just going to be very generic and, certainly likely sound like AI, which is just not what you want. So just to be safe, I would say you don't want any language that came from AI to appear in the final essay. All right, doubts if you're, a good writer. I wouldn't worry about that. So again, we're not talking about academic writing. It's not an essay in that kind of sense. It can be, and if you are good at academic writing, that could actually be a good way to go about it, is to write something like that and sort of showcase your skills in a little bit of a different way. But if you're not good at, for example, academic essay writing, that may not necessarily matter because you're writing a story and it's just about your life and you're the expert on your life. And so you don't really need advanced writing skills to do this effectively. All right, what makes something memorable? Why does one feel fake? One feels real. Why does one feel mature or forced, bragging? How do you make the reader care? Okay, again, so a lot of the techniques, again, we talked about today can help with things like being memorable or sounding real or not bragging, right? If you're just telling a story, and you're not explicitly saying, oh, well, I was the MVP here, or I was a valedictorian, or whatever, and you're just putting that in the context of a sort of factual story, that comes across as less bragging, right? And if you do it with some of the techniques we were talking about today, it becomes a little bit more memorable. If you were to take it too far, right, and kind of overdo it, then yeah, it could start to sound kind of fake or forced. And certainly, the techniques we talked about today are not the only things to do, and they're not even necessarily things you have to do. So if you try them and it just doesn't sound like you, then yeah, I would try some different strategies, but it can be good for all those questions. All right, and that is it. So we will end it there for today. Thank you for listening, and I hope it helped.